Hello everyone, thank you for joining us today. I'm Elizabeth Kilmer, Exhibitions Content Manager here at the Fort Wayne Museum of Art. And for today's Curator's Tour, we are going to be talking about the first selection of our Century of Making Meaning exhibition. This exhibition is a year-long celebration of the museum's 100th anniversary. And as that's such a big and exciting anniversary and accomplishment to achieve, we are bringing out all of the biggest and best pieces that we've collected over our 100 years as a museum. And what we'll see today are some of the key pieces from our first 20 years as a museum. They'll be from the 1920s and the 1930s, and we're excited to share them with you. And the first piece we're going to talk about is actually the first piece that was ever accessioned into the permanent collection at the museum, and it is Richard Muller's Snails on Rhubarb. This is a great, fun, interesting piece to look at, and the closer you get and the longer you take to look at it, the more details start to jump out at you. We have not only the highly detailed rhubarb leaves that Muller has captured, but we also see some frogs, we see snails, a couple of them that look like they're getting ready to battle it out for a new home. We see insects eating the leaves and crawling around on the ground, and it's just an interesting piece to see. Now, this was the inaugural gift from Theodore Theme, one of our earliest benefactors at the museum, and it was his first gift that we received in 1919, and it preceded his larger gift that was the catalyst for the museum being formed. So it has a special place in our collection history as it helped begin the Fort Wayne Museum of Art. Now, another exciting piece that we have is this larger painting by Horace Rockwell, and this painting portrays the illustrious Hanna family of Fort Wayne. Now, the Samuel Hanna family can almost be described as one of the first families or the founders of Fort Wayne. Hanna came to Fort Wayne in the early 1900s, and he got here before it was even a city. It was when the military still lived in the fort. It was a working military fort, and the only people besides the military were essentially squatters or just nomads who had set up camp outside the fort, who at any time could be kicked out by the military who were occupying the fort. Hanna arrived, and it can be argued, built Fort Wayne. When he got there, there weren't any regular roads, there weren't any organized streets, just old trails that people had taken through on their carts or that the military had used themselves. And he set up a little trade post at the corner of what is now Columbia and Bar Streets, and he became a very successful Indian trader in his own right. And he started to gain more and more prominence in the area. He started helping people organize what became the city and encouraging others to move here with not only his own financial success, but that of others who he was helping encourage. And while he lived in Fort Wayne, he not only helped establish a commerce and a community, but he helped install the first roads in Fort Wayne that were more than just timber logs. And he helped establish the First Circuit Court of Northern Indiana, and he was one of those traveling judges on the court, so he would go around to the area being a judge. And he also would help facilitate the first Indiana State Bank and the Wabash and Erie Canal that became so important to river travel and commerce throughout the area. So with how prominent Hanna was, and looking at this portrait, or this family portrait, you may be wondering, why does it look a little odd? Because it does look a little odd as a painting. And the reason for that is, in the early to mid 1900s, the emphasis on family portraiture like this was the accurate representation of the sitter's face. We first wanted to make sure that we knew exactly who we were looking at in this painting, because that is what the patrons were paying the painter for. And it can be argued that Rockwell did a very good job of this, but it's safe to say that he wasn't the most skilled painter. And that isn't to be a knock on Rockwell. It was something that a lot of painters in the US at the time, they weren't the best at painting people. And painting people can be difficult. But he also had a prosperous sign business, so he was also creating like signs for shops and for bars and for industry in the area, but on the side he was also painting. Now, even though the sitters seem very stiff and not very natural, and their hands just seem a little boneless, he did execute what Hanna would have wanted in his painting. All of the individuals have distinct features. We can tell they're individual people. And he has also done a good job of showing the wealth and influence of the family around him. They have brisk and highly starched white collars, which is something that was a way to show that you were wealthy and that you were a prominent member of society, because keeping your collars starched and white was difficult to do. And everyone is dressed in very tailored and rich clothing. We don't really see many like grays or off-whites. We see that these clothes are highly made. We have a very elaborate and sturdy table with this type of structure here. This was something that they likely would have sent away to have brought to their home, and we can see all of what would have been intricate interlay that Rockwell has attempted to represent. And we have one young man here who is not only reading one book, but he has another book next to him showing that he is educated. The family can afford to have their own books. But what may be one of the most significant pieces showing the family's wealth is this object here in the baby's hand. That is a piece of fruit, and something that artists did in the 19th century to show a family's wealth was to show someone holding a piece of fruit or having a piece of fruit next to them, because fruit was expensive. It's not like now when we can go to the store and anyone can buy fruit at any time of the year. It was not an easy product for people to have in their own homes, and to have someone holding it in a painting shows our family is wealthy. Look at this fruit that we can hold just for a painting. Now, we've talked about kind of our local people here, local artists, local influential individuals on the city. But in the early years of the museum's creation, we also collected works of art by artists who were of national importance, who brought influence from European artists back to the United States. And one of those artists is Joseph Penne. He was a well-known printmaker in his lifetime. He and his wife traveled extensively throughout Europe, creating their own guidebooks where his wife would write about them and Penne would make the prints and the illustrations. And with this one here, we can see how Penne was influenced by possibly some impressionists over in France, because some of you who are listening may call to mind Monet's famous paintings of the Gare du Nord in Paris, where you have the trains coming into the station and the steam billowing up and showing the magnificence of industry and the modern age. And we have strong allusions to that here in Penne's print of the Pennsylvania Railroad Station in Philadelphia. We see the steam coming up out of the trains, and we see this train station, which even to this day is regarded as one of the most beautiful train stations in the United States. And it shows the influence of not only Impressionist European artists, but also European construction. What some of you may not know is that until about the 1940s, 50s, the US was typically about 10 to 15 years behind Europe in regards to art and fashion. We always followed what the Europeans did first. So we see that especially here, and you'll see that in the first few iterations of our Century of Making Meaning exhibition too. You'll see a strong influence of European artists mixing in with contemporary American artists, but as the year goes on, we'll see how American art really became its own and started leading the way in modern art. Now, that's not to say that the U.S. didn't have its own artists who were breaking traditions and forging their own path. And an example of that would be the Overbeck Sisters. Now, this group of 4 sisters, consisting of Margaret, Hanna, Elizabeth, and Mary Frances, they created their own successful, self-sustainable ceramic studio at their home in Indiana. And while there were a lot of women working in pottery or in ceramics in the 1900s and the early 20th century, not many of them were also creating the forms and designing the vases and the vessels that were being produced. They were mostly painting. But the Overbeck sisters instead wanted to create their own successful business, and they did. And what was unique to their work, not only the fact that they did everything themselves, but they were sure to decorate the surfaces of their pots or their vases or their bowls with imagery that was native to the Midwest, particularly Indiana. So we have stylized fish that you could find in the rivers in the surrounding area, and we have a very light, soft blue. And what's interesting to know about the glaze is that Elizabeth, she created all of their own glazes herself. They didn't buy their glazes. She was the one who was mixing the different elements that would go into it. So they alone knew how their glazes were made, and we don't even know today how some of them were produced. They were that secretive and very particular about what they were doing. So another work we have that celebrates the history of not only American art but Hoosier art in particular is The Hermitage by John Otis Adams. Adams was one of the most prominent figures in Hoosier Impressionism, and we can see how he truly embraced this style. This painting was done around 1901, and at this point, Adams had studied at the Royal Academy in Munich, which is where a lot of Hoosier Impressionists went to study painting rather than Paris. And he had also helped establish the John Herron School of Art. And the Hermitage was kind of an artist's colony of sorts. Not quite a true colony, but it was kind of like an escape or a haven where artists would go to paint during the summer. And this is a view out the back door of the Hermitage of the building. And we can see Adam's skill in capturing the warmth of a summer day. The sun is coming through and dappling through the leaves, darkening underneath, creating shadows. And we can feel the warmth of that summer breeze that would be going through all of these different flowers and through the trees. And it's a quintessential Adams painting, and it is one of the first that we acquired of Adams, and it was part of the initial gift from Theodore Theme. And because Theme's gift was so ripe with artists who were not only European artists but also local painters, regional painters, he early on helped the museum establish a very broad and in-depth collection from the beginning. So we've mentioned Theme, and we are lucky enough to actually have a bust of him here. So it's safe to say that Theodore Theme was kind of the grandfather to the Fort Wayne Museum of Art. As we've noted, his collection helped create the museum, and when he made that donation to what was then the Fort Wayne Art School and Museum, he had stipulations where he wanted to make sure the leaders and the founders ran the business in a very professional manner. From the beginning, Theme wanted to make sure that the museum was of national reputation and repute, or at least would be able to grow to that status. And he wanted to make sure everything was just held to as high of a standard as he ran his own local business, Wayne Knitting Mills. And even after Theme had moved away from the area, he moved to Los Angeles because the weather was better for his health, he still kept up a very extensive correspondence with Walter McBride, the then head curator or director of the museum. And we can see how involved Theme was and how he truly did care about the museum and wanting it to succeed, even though he was no longer here. So in addition to, well, do we have any questions?
Not at the moment.
Okay. In addition to the artwork, we are fortunate enough to have some different pieces of ephemera that highlight the different eras in the U.S., not in the U.S., in the art school and museum's history. And we've mentioned a few times how it was the art school and museum, and in the 20s and 30s, they were kind of they were two entities but under one umbrella. So a lot of the ephemera we currently have is from the art school itself, and it is called, some of them are called like the programs, showing the different courses that would be offered in the different semesters, and they're often illustrated by prints that students themselves made. And then we have a couple selections of art lights, which would come out at the end of each calendar year, highlighting what the students themselves had done. And one of the more fun pieces that we have is this favorite Fort Wayne recipes, and this was in conjunction with the Art League, who was and still are a great supporter of the arts in the area. But they got together with students from the school and they helped create this cookbook, but members of the Art League put together their favorite recipes that they like to make at home, and this was sold in an effort to raise funds. So if we don't have any more questions, or any questions, I'd like to encourage you guys to come in and really see how this exhibition will be changing over the next year. So this exhibition is on, this part of the exhibition is on through the weekend, and on Monday we will be, is it Monday? Yes. On Monday we'll be switching it out to highlight the 1940s. So on that schedule of about every month, a new decade will be highlighted here in the Loretta Follinger Teeple Gallery. And we're excited for you to come in and join us and see how the collection has changed and grown over the year.